My bangs are messed up. Hello, everyone. I didn't think about that being a problem. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Science on Tap. Can I see a show of hands if this is your first time attending a Science on Tap? Whoa, lots of newbies. That's awesome. So this is a collaboration between the Florida Museum of Natural History, where myself and my name is Chelsea work as a public programs museum educator. And this is Sadie, who...
And I'm representing... It is a problem.
You didn't learn anything.
For the new people, we don't always wear masks. Mosquitoes are special. I'm Sadie. I'm with the Thompson Earth Systems Institute. We're a part of the Florida Museum, and we co-coordinate these programs with the Florida Museum Public Programs Department. And we also partner with Cypress and Grove here. We're so glad that they'll have us and provide the equipment and sound for us. So we're really grateful to them. We also want to thank our tablers for coming out. We've got the, I have to read it because I knew I was going to mess it up, the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants in the back. If you haven't had a chance to stop by and check them out, please do. And we also have some Sierra Club information in the back as well, and we're glad that they're joining us.
What do we got? And there are our logos.
We can't do this program without your help and your feedback. So at the end, we will be asking you to complete a short survey. We'll have them on iPads. We'll make it very easy, and we really appreciate your help. And in return, we have reusable bags that you can take home with you. So thank you so much in advance. We really take your feedback to heart and want to keep making these programs as best as we can. You can learn more about this program and other programs by following us on social media. You can follow the Florida Museum on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Florida Museum, and Tessie or the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at UF Earth Systems. I might have to move this, it's hard to see. We also have a new initiative at the Thompson Earth Systems Institute called Know Your Florida. It's an Instagram campaign. There are 600 to 900 new Floridians every day, and we want to help them learn more about their state, the wildlife, the natural history, how the government works here. So you can join in on that fun by following us on Instagram. I know.
It's really distracting.
Mosquitoes are pesky even in mask form. If you want to keep up with what's going on in the state's environment, Tessie produces a monthly environmental newsletter called Earth to Florida. We try and round up all the environmental news and make it into short, digestible bits so you can quickly catch up each month. If you're interested, you can sign up online, but we've also got a sign-up sheet in the back.
So just to let you know, we have a lot of really awesome events coming up at the museum for all ages. So we have stuff for young children, families, adults, a combination of all of them. And one we really wanted to highlight tonight audience is the Florida Springs film series that we're starting February 24th. This will actually be held at the Florida Museum, so it gives you an opportunity to go to the museum at nighttime, which is always exciting. And we'll be showing a different film each part of the series, and it also will include different moderators and panelists to talk more about the springs that we love so much here in Florida. And so the first one that we have coming up will be February 24th. And like I said, we'll be at the museum, and we'll be showing the film Water's Journey, that first one.
Okay, so if you've been with us before, you know how this works, but if you're new, you actually have the opportunity to interact with tonight's presentation using your smartphone. You don't have to download an app or anything, you just need to use whatever internet browser is on your phone. You can go to the website www.menti.com and you type in the code up there. So if you're interested, go ahead and pull out your phone and do that now, and we'll do a little test question to get you warmed up.
Do you want to make an announcement with these seats? There's the Lots of people standing. Yeah.
While you're doing that, we do have a few open seats. I know some people are standing in the back. We've got a few over here. So if you want to come, kind of work your way in, I'm sure people will happily let you squeeze by. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, but the code will stay up there if you're still catching up. Okay, so to get us warmed up, we're going to play a little game of two truths and a fly. Now, we've learned actually that mosquitoes are in the same family as flies. Is that correct? Order.
We're still learning.
That's why we have the experts. However, not all of these flies are created equal. So your job is to decide which of these two images are the mosquitoes and which is not a mosquito and just a different type of fly. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to be same images on a poll. Go ahead and vote.
So you're voting on which one is the imposter? I had to jump over here because I couldn't see.
No, we're gonna have to take this off, I think.
And have them just hold it. What? And have them hold it.
Yeah, because otherwise you can't see what's on your slides.
Oh, this is close.
I need my introduction there.
Keep them coming. Wait, it's number 2 that's not right.
I think so. Yeah. I didn't even reveal the answer.
I know, it says something about
All right, I think we're ready for the answer. Can I get a last drum roll, please? The imposter is number 2. Now,
Oh.
I unfortunately can't tell you any fun facts about them, but I'm sure Larry will happily do so when he gets up here and explain what it was.
Oh. And just in case you're all feeling kind of bad about yourselves because you didn't know exactly, this was a headline that Larry alerted me to earlier this week, which reads, "Giant mosquito photographed in Argentina compared to something from Jumanji," when in fact, that giant insect you see up there is not actually a mosquito, and it still made headlines. It's actually a robber fly, if that's, and they eat mosquitoes. So there you go. Don't feel bad. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sadie.
All right, a lot of people. So with that, I want to introduce tonight's speaker. Lawrence Reeves is a research assistant with the University of Florida in Vero Beach, based at the Medical Entomology Laboratory. He majored in conservation biology as an undergraduate and studied butterflies in Philippine rainforests for his master's degree. His doctoral work on biodiversity monitoring by DNA from mosquito blood meals was inspired by a childhood love of Jurassic Park and a bite from a dengue virus-infected mosquito. He has since become quite fond of mosquitoes and their interactions with other organisms, and his current research is focused on better understanding the mosquito diversity in Florida and beyond. We're so excited to have him here tonight. Let's give a round of applause for Larry.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, which one is the clicker or the laser?
In the middle is the laser.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So I'm Larry Reeves. I am an entomologist with the University of Florida. So I really enjoy mosquitoes. So I approach mosquitoes with the kind of admiration that a bird watcher approaches birds with. So I do still kill them when they're biting me. And yeah, Anyway, so like I said, I'm an entomologist here with the University of Florida, and I just want to explain, I'll start by explaining how I came to kind of appreciate mosquitoes more than the average person. So back in 1993, there was this movie that came out called Jurassic Park. My dad told me and my family that we were going to a movie, but they didn't explain anything about it. And so being a really nerdy kid interested in animals, dinosaurs, and all kinds of insects, I was obsessed with Jurassic Park when I saw it. So fast forward to being in graduate school at the University of Florida, it came to my attention that there was this technique called blood meal analysis, where you can take the DNA, take the host DNA, you can extract the host DNA out of a blood-fed mosquito and use that DNA to identify what they'd been feeding on. So I thought, oh man, it's just like Jurassic Park. And so that became my PhD dissertation. So pay attention to your kids and give them all kinds of cool opportunities like taking them to movies. Okay. So right now I'm a research assistant scientist down at the Florida Medical Entomology Lab. This is a UF-run laboratory that's devoted to studying mosquitoes and other medically important arthropods. So down here we house 12 faculty members who all primarily are working with mosquitoes. So why does UF have a lab dedicated to mosquito research? So if we think about kind of some of these scary animals in the world, things like snakes, sharks, crocodiles, and humans, when you look at the numbers, they aren't quite as scary. So sharks are only killing, this is data from 2015, sharks are only killing about 6 people per year. Crocodiles about 1,000, snakes about 60,000. And one note about this is primarily going to be in other countries. In the United States, snakes are only responsible for around 5 deaths per year. Comparatively, humans are killing about 580,000 other human beings. If you compare that to mosquitoes, we can call mosquitoes the most dangerous animals in the world. Kind of indirectly though, because of course it's not the mosquitoes directly killing a human, it's the pathogens that the disease-causing pathogens that they're transmitting. Okay, so now I kind of just want to gauge everybody's feelings on mosquitoes. So if you could type into Mentimeter one word that you would use to describe mosquitoes. Okay, so annoying seems to be a big one. Malaria, expletive, blood-sucking, vampiric. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm surprised itchy isn't larger. That's a good one. Okay. So a lot of really negative things seem to be showing up. Guys, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a quick photo of this. Okay. Someone said proboscis. That's great. Did I see beautiful? I think I saw beautiful up there. Oh yeah, great. Okay. Oh man. So this is kind of the dichotomy of mosquitoes. Okay. So one more we'll do. In one word, how do you feel about mosquitoes? That's a good one. Tickle, yeah. Antagonistic is good. These are all some really great ones. Okay. So that's great. I just want to kind of get a feel for the attitude, the attitudes towards mosquitoes that are in this room today. Pure hatred. Okay. So one more question. How many mosquito species do you think that there are on the planet today? As the answers are coming in, I'll tell you a little bit more about mosquitoes. So mosquitoes have been around since probably about the Jurassic period. So mosquitoes have been around probably since about the Jurassic period. The earliest mosquito fossil that we have is from the Cretaceous. So in that amount of, oh, sorry guys. Oh, there we go. Oh, wow. Okay. So, oh, wow, you guys are doing pretty good here. Okay. So on Earth today, we've described about 3,500 mosquito species. That's just the number of mosquitoes that have been formally described by scientists. It's likely, we estimate that the real number of mosquitoes on the planet is about 3 to 5 times that. So if you said about 3,000, that's pretty good, but the real number is going to be closer to about 10,000. So you can also see here that these mosquitoes come in a relatively wide range of shapes and sizes. The color doesn't show up pretty well. The color doesn't show up so well up here, but there are some relatively colorful mosquitoes. So we have some like this. This is on the left. This is one from the Sonoran Desert called Aedes purpuripes, relatively rare. But here in Florida, we can see this one really brilliantly orange mosquito. It's kind of like the monarch butterfly of mosquitoes. This is Aedes fulvus. If you're out in the woodlands in the spring, or out in kind of wooded areas in the spring, and later in the summer as well, you might see this mosquito. There are also mosquitoes, this doesn't show up so well, but so I like to think of mosquitoes as little blood-feeding hummingbirds. They're really small, but you have some of them like this. This is one called Haemogogus leucosolanus, from South America, that's covered in these purple iridescent scales, much like some of the tropical hummingbirds. But this is one you don't want to get bit by. This is a vector of jungle yellow fever in South America. So, yeah. If you get bit by this, make sure you have a yellow fever vaccine. Okay, so now let's list all the mosquito species that we can. Oh, good. Culex is one. Annoying. Yeah, I noticed there's a lot of entomology folks out here. So Seraphora ferox, Aedes albopictus. Hey, Sadie, do I scroll down or, oh, okay. Aegypti. Okay, so Seraphora ferox is one. Aedes aegypti, Iranitina sapphirina, Anopheles. So I'm actually pretty impressed that we're able to name some of these mosquitoes. Oh. I'm pretty impressed that we're able to name so many mosquitoes. So this is really good. So quickly, Sadie, the clicker. Hold on, we're not advancing. Uh-oh. So on this next part, I'll run through a few of the mosquito species that are that living here in Gainesville and in Florida, we should have a good idea, at least awareness of. So two of the most important mosquitoes that we are going to have here in Florida are Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. So Aedes aegypti, and to a lesser extent Aedes albopictus, are some of the most serious vectors of pathogens. So when I say pathogens, pathogens are disease-causing agents. So for example, malaria is a disease, but the pathogen that causes malaria is going to be the Plasmodium parasite. So when I say pathogens, it just means the organism that's causing the disease. So these two mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, are vectors for serious diseases. For example, Zika virus, dengue virus, chikungunya, and yellow fever. So these are container mosquitoes. These are really common in yards in Florida. Both of these are not native to the state. So Aedes aegypti came over in the 1800s via the slave trade from Africa. More recently, in the 1980s, Aedes albopictus came over, presumably through the used tire trade. And so these guys came from Asia, and when they came over, they displaced Aedes aegypti throughout a lot of the state. So now, so now we have Aedes aegypti mosquitoes that are much less common than they used to be. And primarily we're getting these in South Florida, and we're getting them in urban areas. So at my house down in Vero Beach, I have both of these flying around in my yard. But here in Gainesville, we don't expect to see both of these species co-occurring. We can kind of see the difference. If you guys want to take a look at the mosquitoes when they bite you, that's what I like to do. But anyway, so if you look at that, if you want to know which species you have, you can kind of tell the difference looking at the thorax. Aedes aegypti has this kind of lyre shape, whereas Aedes albopictus just has a straight line. Okay, so another really important mosquito here in Florida is Aedes taeniorhynchus. Florida would not be particularly habitable were we not able to figure out methods for controlling this mosquito. If you've been to Cedar Key, if you've been to the Everglades or much of the East Coast, any coast in Florida, you've probably been bitten by this mosquito. At certain times of year, especially after strong tides, we get these enormous emergences of these mosquitoes to the extent that in the 1800s, we actually had a county here in Florida called Mosquito County. Mosquito County took up the vast majority of Central Florida. Our lab in Vero Beach is kind of located right in the heart of what used to be Mosquito County. This all went away in 1844. Okay, another good one to recognize, and if you see this mosquito, you will notice it. This is one of the largest mosquitoes that we have in the state. This is Pseuropora ciliata, sometimes called the galley nipper, sometimes called the shaggy-legged galley nipper. They've got these kind of golden silk or banana spider style legs. They're pretty cool. And another one just quickly to be aware of is our mosquitoes in the genus Anopheles. So historically, we had malaria here in the eastern United States, but we were able to eradicate it, and so now we no longer have these parasites circulating here in Florida. But these are the historic vectors of malaria in Florida and the eastern United States, and members of this genus Anopheles are the vectors of malaria in Africa and elsewhere in the world. Sorry. Okay. So one more gauging the audience. So true or false, the only good mosquito is a dead mosquito. Hey, Sadie. Where should I point this? Over there? Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So I'm really impressed that that the majority at least is saying false. So I want to introduce all of you to a mosquito called Toxorhynchites rutilis. These guys look vicious, right? Sometimes they're called the elephant mosquitoes. They kind of have, the males anyway, they kind of have these palps that look like tusks and a recurved proboscis that looks like a trunk. I don't have a Mentimeter question for this, but does anyone want to guess what kinds of animals these mosquitoes are feeding from? Yeah, so I'm hearing some nods, so you guys already know this story. But but yeah, so these mosquitoes are huge. This is this is Aedes albopictus. So this is going to be a kind of a typical size for a mosquito. And if we look at this in comparison to Toxorynchites, it kind of dwarfs them. So this group of mosquitoes, we have this one species here in the eastern United States, but this genus occurs throughout the tropics. These are the largest mosquitoes that you're ever going to come across. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you guys this mosquito feeding from one of its helpless victims. So Toxorynchites rutilis never takes a blood meal. They feed entirely from flowers. So mosquitoes need flower nectar to kind of provide themselves with energy. But in this species, they don't need to feed from human or any kind of vertebrate blood at all. So they're exclusively flying around to flowers and hunting for nectar. No one's really looked at it, but they're likely pollinators. You can see in this photo, this individual's covered in the pollen from these Biden's flowers. So in general, these guys are beneficial mosquitoes to have around. But it gets even better. This is the larva of Toxorynchites rutilis. These things are monsters. If we compare this mosquito to the size to some Aedes albopictus larvae, we can see that just like the adults, the larvae are going to dwarf these Aedes albopictus. So these guys co-occur in the same types of larval habitats. So in tree holes or any kind of water holding containers, we can see these we can see these mosquitoes. But so not only do the adults of these mosquitoes not take blood meals, but their larvae are really vicious predators of other mosquitoes. In particular, those that are vectors for pathogens like Aedes albopictus, and others like Aedes triceriatus that co-occur in these habitats. Yeah, so these are great mosquitoes to have around. So each one of these larvae is going to consume a ton of mosquito larvae in order to grow and develop into an adult. In some cases, we use these mosquitoes as biocontrols. These mosquitoes have been introduced into other parts of the world where they don't normally occur to help control Aedes albopictus and other pestiferous mosquitoes. Okay, so there's a mosquito that's better to have alive than dead. I don't know about that one. And Jumanji is pretty popular tonight. Eggs is accurate. Yeah, so mosquitoes are coming from water, and they come from all kinds of different types of water sources. So mosquitoes have a life cycle similar to that of a butterfly or a moth. They undergo complete metamorphosis, which means they're going to have an egg stage, a larval stage, a pupal stage, and an adult stage. There are some important differences, though, when you think compared to butterflies and moths. In particular, the larvae and the pupae of mosquitoes are going to be aquatic. So they come from all kinds of different aquatic habitats. And so just to give an idea about some of these habitats, of course, they're coming from these permanent wetlands and swamps. This is what we kind of think of as as typical mosquito habitat, but this is only for certain species. Mosquitoes are really averse to predators, in particular fish. So they try to seek out habitats where they're going to have kind of free reign of everything. They don't need to worry about being eaten. So this is the ground in the Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona. This is great mosquito habitat. There are a number of mosquito species that are adapted to laying eggs in kind of dry, low areas where they expect water will come in the future. So during the monsoon season, this area looks like this. These areas have tons of mosquito larvae or mosquito eggs in the soil, kind of like waiting around like seeds for rain to come. So you can see all these immature mosquitoes just in this one small puddle. And if you pan around, you can see how dry this area is. So seasonally, this area gets some water, and that's when these mosquitoes kind of explode. So here in the eastern United States, this is the kind of habitats that these floodwater mosquitoes like. We get these ephemeral wetlands when the rainy season starts in the summer months. And so these habitats, when that rain comes, it triggers the eggs to hatch. Around the coastal areas, these strong tides can also bring about enormous emergences of these floodwater mosquitoes. So this is right behind our lab down in Vero Beach. You can see here, this is an area that has flooded after a strong tide. And if you walk around and you look down, you can see where all the mosquitoes are coming from. Okay, and everybody like complains about mosquitoes in their yard, but like they're probably coming from your yard. If you have any kind of bird baths that you don't wash out periodically, or any kind of water holding debris in your yard, you're going to have Aedes albopictus larvae and other mosquitoes using those areas as larval habitats. So not so much of a concern here in Florida, but rock pools are a great place for many mosquito larvae. There are certain species that are adapted specifically to rock pools. In general, these don't have fish, so these mosquitoes love them. We also have some kind of atypical and really interesting mosquito larval habitats. So this is a mosquito that we have here in Florida. It's called Dinoceroides cancer. And on the Atlantic coast, we have these giant Cardosoma land crabs. They make these really extensive burrows that go straight down, in some cases go straight down all the way to the water table. So these mosquitoes lay their eggs in the water at the bottom of these burrows, and those larvae develop there and eventually they emerge. The adults also hang around during the daytime when they're inactive. They hang out in the tunnels of the burrows. Sorry. So phytotelmata are any kind of structure on a plant that's holding water. It means water or plant pond. So phytotelmata include things like water holding tree holes, which are a great place for mosquito larvae, no fish. Bromeliads. Here in Florida, we have several mosquito species that are associated specifically with bromeliads. The only place where you'll see their larvae are in some of these bromeliads. And one quick note, this one, Culex biscayensis, this is possibly a Florida endemic, but the only place in the world that we know of to see this mosquito is Fairchild Tropical Gardens in Miami. As far as we know, it does not occur anywhere else. So if you go into the tropics and also maybe in your yard, you may have these birds of paradise flowers, these heliconias. The flower bracts hold water, and at least in the tropics, a number of mosquito species are adapted to using those as larval habitats, including some of these toxorhynchides that chow down on the mosquitoes, and there are these other larvae that are here in the water. Okay, so mosquitoes are incredible. So this is a mosquito called from the genus Wyomia. They're laying their eggs in heliconia bracts like this, but in this case, this is a mosquito that it's difficult to access this water, so it kind of flies around. You can just imagine little equations going off in its head. Every time it makes a more major dip, it's throwing an egg down into the water down there in the bottom. And so in some cases, these some species of Wyomia are so associated with there's one species of Wyomia that's associated with this one particular habitat. So the internodes of bamboo hold water, and there can be a small beetle living in those internodes, and when they emerge, they leave a tiny millimeter-sized exit hole. So these mosquitoes, just like this, they fly around and they throw their eggs straight down that hole and into the water. So that's a place where the larvae can develop totally free of predators. Pitcher plants Nepenthes pitcher plants in Southeast Asia are great places for mosquito larvae. Here in Florida, we have our own pitcher plants. So these photos were taken in a town, a very appropriately named town called Sumatra in the Florida Panhandle. On the right is a species of pitcher plant, the purple pitcher plant. These are all the genus Sarracenia that provides larval habitat for one mosquito species. So this is Wyomia smithii. This is looking down into the pitcher of one of these pitcher plants. Normally, these plants are carnivorous. So any insects that come along and fall into this water, they're going to get trapped there. And that plant secretes digestive enzymes that digest the poor insects. But this mosquito, it throws its eggs down into these pitchers, they hatch, and the larvae develop. And then the adults ultimately emerge. Okay. So mosquito eggs come in all different shapes and sizes. Up on the first three on the left at the top are floodwater species. Others, like Anopheles eggs, have these kind of elaborate floats that keep the eggs at the surface of the water. Others, like and Aedes eggs, are super hydrophobic. And so these eggs just kind of skate around on the surface of the water, kind of like a puck on top of an air hockey table. Okay. So, okay. It is, yeah. So just in case anyone hasn't looked closely at the mosquito larvae that they might have around their house, this is what they look like. There's a few different moving things here, but these guys that wiggle to swim, those are the mosquito larvae. And you'll see them coming up to the surface and hanging down upside down a lot like a bat. The reason they do that is to breathe. So they breathe through these things called siphons. So this is kind of like a snorkel that just touches the surface of the water. And by touching the surface, they're able to obtain oxygen. So for the most part, the larva stays facing down. If anything disturbs it, it'll wiggle its way away from that danger. Other mosquitoes, so there are a few species of mosquitoes that have these modified siphons, and these mosquitoes are associated with certain aquatic vegetation. In some cases, some invasive plants like potentially water lettuce, water hyacinth, and other native plants. So instead of surfacing to breathe, they use this like saw-like siphon and insert it down into the roots of these aquatic plants. And by doing that, they're able to obtain oxygen directly from the plant. So as larvae, mosquitoes don't reproduce. Their sole purpose is to eat a ton of food and grow into pupa. So in most cases, mosquitoes are filter feeders. You can see here with these Culex biskinensis larvae, they're using these brushes over their mouths to create a water current that's pulling in bacteria, little microorganisms that are floating around in the water, and other organic detritus. So that's the food for most mosquito larvae. But as we talked about, some are also predators. Okay, so the pupae, so once a mosquito larva has fed enough, it's going to turn into a pupa. This is analogous to the chrysalis stage of a butterfly. One big difference is that these guys are mobile. So for the most part, they hang out near the surface. They don't feed at all during this stage. They're hanging out at the surface with these these are called respiratory trumpets. Instead of a siphon, and as I mentioned, they are mobile and they respond to stimuli. So if they get scared, they're able to swim their way right down to the bottom. All these kind of brown tic-tac shaped things in this water are mosquito pupa. And you can see that as soon as they see something coming, they dive down. Okay, so from the pupa, an adult mosquito is going to emerge. This happens through kind of a suture on the top of the thorax. And they'll hang out next to their larval habitat for a little bit of time after they emerge, mostly hanging onto any vegetation nearby. And they do this until their exoskeleton has hardened enough, enabling them to fly away. In some cases, you have male mosquitoes that hang out in these places waiting for females to emerge. And it may comfort some people to know that mosquitoes have their own parasites to deal with. On the left, these little greenish bulbs are mites that attached onto the mosquito larva, or the mosquito when it was a larva. And these mites, once the mosquito emerges, they crawl onto the body of the adult mosquito. They may feed from the mosquito a little bit, but they primarily are using the mosquitoes to move them to other water bodies. So when this guy goes off and lays eggs in a new water body, they'll drop off. They also get these pseudoscorpions attached to them in some case, or occasionally. And these are also just kind of hitchhiking to the next location. So male and female mosquitoes look a bit different. On that first slide that on that first quiz at the beginning, that one orange guy you saw. You can tell the difference between males and females by looking at the antennae and these palps. They look a lot like antlers. So if you see a mosquito that has these really antlerish antennae, it's probably a male, and they will hang out around hosts, waiting for incoming females. So just like butterflies and moths, many mosquitoes have wings in their bodies that are covered in these sometimes colorful scales. This is one that we have in our area that has these really broad kind of salt and pepper scales all over its wings. Okay, so the primary food of mosquitoes in general is not blood. Blood does not provide the energy and nutrition that mosquitoes need to fly around hunting for their hosts. They get definitely pollinators, in other cases likely pollinators of a ton of different plant species. There's a lot of orchids that are pollinated specifically by mosquitoes. So I have a mango tree in my yard down in South Florida, or down in Vero Beach. And if I noticed going out at night that the flowers just last week were covered in mosquitoes. So I got curious and I pulled out this this big vacuum that I have for insects. And so I pulled a bunch of all the insects off of these flowers, and I found that mosquitoes were outnumbering any other flower visitors about 10 to 1. So we don't know much about the benefits of mosquitoes and in terms of pollination, but it hasn't been well studied, and it's likely that they are important pollinators. And real quick, I'll just tell one quick story, one quick cool natural history story. This is a really bizarre mosquito called Malaya. These come from Southeast Asia. They're in the Philippines, and I've been looking for them, and one day I'll get a photograph. Ants. Sorry to jump around. So ants, if I'm an ant and I'm hungry, I'll go up to an ant that has already fed from some sugar, and I'll get it to throw up in my mouth, and I'll eat that sugar water that it's just thrown up. These mosquitoes have kind of hacked that. They fly around, or they hang around these ants, and when they get hungry, they go up to the ants. They use this funny looking proboscis to tickle the mouths of these ants and trick those ants into thinking that they are another ant, and those ants share their food with these mosquitoes. So we really need to study these guys more because they're so cool. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the really interesting side of mosquitoes, which is the blood feeding. So if it weren't for blood feeding, we wouldn't be here talking about mosquitoes tonight. It is because mosquitoes need to feed from blood that they are so important in terms of vectoring disease, et cetera, yeah. Okay, so it's only the female mosquitoes that feed from blood. If you feed blood to a male mosquito, or let me back up a little bit. So in order to feed from blood, it requires some really intricate adaptations and evolution. So males don't have that. If you force feed a male mosquito blood, it's gonna kill it. Like when they bite, they have those adaptations, and The reason that they're feeding from blood is to obtain proteins and amino acids that they need to produce fully developed eggs. So in most cases, there certainly are exceptions, but in most cases, mosquitoes cannot produce eggs without taking, female mosquitoes can't produce eggs without taking a blood meal. So the way this works is after a female mosquito emerges from its pupa, it's going to mate, and then it's going to start host seeking. It's going to host seek until it's able to obtain a blood meal. And then after that blood meal, it's going to kind of retreat to a nice kind of quiet place where it can rest, hang out, and ingest that blood and start producing those eggs. So over a period of a couple days, these eggs develop, that mosquito goes and lays its eggs. And then it begins host seeking again. This is really important for disease ecology. The way to think about this is 1 full blood meal equals 1 batch of eggs. So if a mosquito lives several months, it's going to take several blood meals over the course of those months and lay several batches of eggs. So when a mosquito is host seeking, it's honing in on a few things. Can I see that cup? Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to pass this around. If you don't want to smell it, you don't have to. But don't touch what's inside. So when you guys smell this is at least for the mosquito Aedes aegypti, this is the kind of smell that it's really honing in on, or one among them anyway. So from a distance, mosquitoes are using carbon dioxide. So if we're standing out in the forest and we're alive and we're breathing, we're putting out a plume of carbon dioxide. Any host-seeking mosquito that encounters that plume is going to fly, is going to kind of track us down based on that plume. But when these mosquitoes get closer to us, they're going to start using other compounds. Hexanoic acid and lactic acid are what you're smelling in that cup, and a few other things too. But that's a lure that's been designed specifically to target Aedes aegypti. And interestingly, that lure was designed over the stinky sock, or was made by looking at the composition of stinky sock smell. And figuring out what the anyway. I'm not a chemist. Okay, so these smells are being detected by the antennae. As they get closer, they're going to rely on things other than CO2, and they're also going to rely on body heat. So if we really want to not be attractive to mosquitoes, we gotta eliminate our carbon dioxide that we're breathing out and our body heat. As they get closer, they're starting to rely more on vision. Many mosquitoes are attracted to dark colors or contrasting colors. We also have some mosquitoes that really hone in on sound. These are primarily going to be mosquitoes that feed from frogs, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So when a mosquito finds you, it's going to bite. When we look at a mosquito, that proboscis is not the actual thing that's going inside our skin and drinking blood. It's not quite like a straw. So you can see the proboscis here. It flexes, revealing these stylets. And so these stylets that are hidden by the proboscis, they fish around under your skin looking for a blood vessel. They slice it, and then they feed. And kind of to add insult to injury, when mosquitoes are feeding from you, what they want are primarily proteins and amino acids. They don't need all that excess water. So often when a mosquito is biting you, not only are they drinking your blood, but they're also peeing on you. Okay, so like I mentioned, mosquitoes have these really exquisite adaptations that enable them to successfully feed on these vertebrate hosts. When they bite us, we have our own defenses against things like mosquito stylets fishing around for blood vessels. So to get around that, mosquitoes are going to be injecting saliva into you. And when we have a reaction to a mosquito bite, it's primarily going to be, or it's caused by the injection of that saliva. And that saliva is used to kind of overcome host defenses against, or to overcome things like blood clotting and the host's immune response. So it's because of blood feeding that mosquitoes are such efficient vectors of pathogens. This is the best image that I have to kind of illustrate mosquitoes as vectors. So vectors are organisms that are transmitting a pathogen from one host to another. You guys, if you can see these weird looking shapes on the underside of this mosquito's abdomen, these are the eggs of a botfly. You guys know about botflies? Okay, let's talk about botflies real quick because they're so cool. Okay, so botflies, the larvae of botflies live inside vertebrate hosts. There's a species called the human botfly, Dermatobia hominis, who uses primate hosts, humans and other non-human primates. They live in South America. We do not have them here. We do have these guys here. This is a different species of botfly that uses these wood rats as hosts. But so this is a big fly. These are roughly the size of a bumblebee, right? So if one of these came up to you and tried to land on you to lay eggs, we would notice that pretty quickly, and that fly might get killed, or it just may not be successful. So they do something a little bit more devious. They hang out near their host, and they wait for incoming mosquitoes and other flies. When they see one, they fly up to it, tackle it in the air, and wrestle it down to the ground, and then they lay eggs on it. Then they let it go, and it flies off, and on to its host. And then when that mosquito bites you, your body heat triggers those eggs to hatch. And the next thing you know, you have botflies. And after that, you're trying to put steak on top of the botfly to hopefully the larva will crawl up into the steak, but it doesn't work. Okay, so true or false? If I am infected with the dengue fever virus and a mosquito bites me, then immediately bites another person, that person will also become infected. Oh, good. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm just gonna cut it off. So this is false. So first, it needs to be the correct species of mosquito. Not all mosquitoes are equal vectors for certain pathogens. Second, there needs to be kind of an incubation period inside that mosquito. So if I have the dengue virus and the correct mosquito, Aedes aegypti or Aedes albopictus, if they feed on me, they're gonna fly off and they can't immediately infect a host. That virus is gonna be in the gut of that mosquito, and it doesn't want to stay there. It needs to get into the salivary glands so that when that mosquito bites a subsequent host, it can inject its saliva and introduce the virus into the new host. So mosquitoes are really efficient vectors of pathogens. These are some examples of human pathogens that mosquitoes move around. And one thing so each of these viruses and parasites or pathogens is going to have a really unique transmission system. Some of these, like dengue virus and Zika virus, are going to move from person to person by mosquitoes. But in many other cases, they need some kind of intermediate. The transmission systems involve these other non-human animals. We'll talk about one real quick now. So here in Florida, we have a subtype of the Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus. It's called Everglades virus, and this is primarily found in southern Florida in kind of the sylvatic natural ecosystems of the Everglades, around Everglades National Park. So this virus circulates among rodents by a mosquito. So I asked my little brother up in New York City, who's an architect, to make me these illustrations, so to help me explain this, because it's a little bit complicated. So I hope the cutesy animals are helpful. So this is his depiction of a cotton rat. So these cotton rats are common throughout Florida. In southern Florida, they are the reservoir hosts for Everglades virus. So a reservoir host is an organism that supports the survival and development of a pathogen and serves as a source of infection for other hosts. So in this case, cotton rats are the reservoir hosts for Everglades virus. The vector is this mosquito, Culex cdci. This is named after the center. I love this. So Culex cdci is named after the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. So I think it's pretty cool. Okay. So the way this transmission system works is this virus is circulating among these rodents vectored by this mosquito. So an infected rodent, if it's bitten by a Culex cdci mosquito, the mosquito is going to become infected after it lays eggs, et cetera. It's going to go off, bite another host, and that second reservoir host is going to become infected, also going to become infected with this virus. But these, excuse me. So in the ecosystems of southern Florida, we of course have more than these cotton rats. We also have things like raccoons, bobcats, rabbits, and foxes. So we can think of these as dead-end hosts. If they become infected with a virus, they may still get an infection and they may get sick from the virus, but they won't support the replication of the virus to an extent that they themselves can infect new mosquitoes that feed on them. Does that make sense? They're dead ends for this virus, and they help to impede the transmission of the virus. So in the ecosystems of the Everglades, we have something like this. These Culex cdci mosquitoes, they'll feed from a wide range of mammals. They really like mammals. So they're going to feed on raccoons, these rats, everything else. But so the presence of these other hosts serve to kind of dilute the transmission of Everglades virus. They're really beneficial to have around because they get infected with the virus, they don't reinfect new mosquitoes. But the Everglades have gone through some pretty substantial changes in the past decades. In particular, we've got these Burmese pythons that have come in. So these Burmese pythons, we suspect, were introduced in the 1980s in the Flamingo area of Everglades National Park, where they've really proliferated and expanded their range. And in doing so, they've begun to consume all these various mammal species. So now we have an altered system for a transmission system for this virus. So we've knocked out these dilution hosts, and what we suspect is happening is that these cotton rats are so fertile, more so than things like bobcats or rabbits, that they can remain in the system they can kind of resist the predation pressure from the pythons, whereas these less fertile animals kind of get knocked out. So we've seen these precipitous declines in things like bobcats and marsh rabbits and raccoons in the Everglades, whereas the cotton rats have stayed kind of the same. And so one of the things that we've done, and this is work that we did with kind of spearheaded by Nathan Burkett-Cadena, one of our colleagues down at the Florida Medical Entomology Lab, we showed that the host patterns of Culex cdci have shifted. We compared current results to the 1970s, where a guy named John Edmond found that for this mosquito, about 14% of their blood meals were coming from cotton rats. Whereas today, we found in our current study that 76% of Culex cdci blood meals came from these cotton rats. So we suspect that this results in increased prevalence of Everglades virus throughout the Everglades. And for humans, the implications are that you're more likely to become infected with Everglades virus if you are in these areas. And so just real quick, Everglades virus is not particularly pathogenic. It can cause disease. In most cases, it's not severe enough to be reported. Okay, so mosquitoes feed from all kinds of animals. They're going to feed from reptiles, amphibians, mammals, and birds. It's not just warm-blooded animals that are fed upon. So in Florida, what kinds of animals do you guys think are most often fed upon by mosquitoes? Sorry, I made this presentation too long. Oh yeah, okay, good. So yeah, lizards and birds. All kinds of stuff. Yeah, okay. So we're gonna move real quick. So on the right, this is what the mosquito host network looks like at a field site on the University of Florida campus. So on the right, we have a bunch of, each of these colored bars represents a individual mosquito species. On the left, each bar represents a host species. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see that humans are relatively low on the list. So at this field site, nobody is living out here, but humans are active in this area. So even with decent human presence, we still are relatively low on the list compared to these other animals. Birds are a very common host for mosquitoes, in particular the northern cardinal. I don't know what it is about these guys, but I'm really disappointed anytime I find cardinal DNA inside a mosquito. Next to cardinals, these brown and green anoles are some of the most often fed upon hosts in Florida. So these guys have mosquitoes that specialize on feeding on them, and also some of the more generalist mosquito species are feeding from them. We also have frog specialist mosquitoes that just fly around at night listening for the songs of male frogs, and they use that to locate their host. We're almost done. Yeah. Okay. So there's also these flies related to mosquitoes. They're kind of the sister taxon to mosquitoes. These are called the corythrellids. They're the frog biting midges. And just like the mosquitoes, they are attracted to the songs of male frogs singing for females. And you can see these corythrellids are going crazy listening to this frog. So they're hoping that they can hop on and take a blood meal. Interestingly, these guys are also, their larvae are predators of mosquitoes. So mosquitoes are also feeding from animals that we wouldn't necessarily expect to be good hosts for mosquitoes. So in this case, this is an American crocodile in Everglades National Park, totally covered in these Aedes, these salt marsh mosquitoes. And we also, it's hard to see, but there are some mosquitoes that have been killed here in the mouth. And it's hard to see, you can't see, but some also have been like crushed in the eyelids. Manatees get fed upon. This is a Culex mosquito feeding on a manatee in Everglades National Park. And also fish. So it makes sense that maybe mud skippers, these kind of amphibious fish, would be fed upon by mosquitoes, but not only, in a recent study showed that not only mud skippers, but also other gobies and some of these eels are fed upon by mosquitoes in Southeast Asia. So one of the really interesting mosquito host interactions that we have uncovered is that of Uranitenia sapphirina. So this mosquito, its hosts have been like unknown for decades. We can collect good numbers of these mosquitoes blood fed, and we crush their blood meals, and it has bright red blood, just like any other host. But we have not been able to figure out what kinds of animals these guys feed on. When we use our molecular tests to look at the host DNA, we always get negative results. But a few years ago, we were able to figure this out because we got frustrated in the lab. We went out and hung these mosquitoes at night, and we figured out what they were doing. So this is down at River Styx. This is a wetland north of Orange Lake, just outside of Micanopy. This is one of my favorite spots. And we kind of figured out this mystery there. So these mosquitoes hang out in the mud where these earthworms are. And they feed from earthworms. This is the first time any mosquito has been recognized to specialize on a non-vertebrate host. And we didn't know it at the time, but they have red blood, and you can see it kind of pulsing through this dorsal vein on the back of the worm. And so we figured out that not only are they feeding on these earthworms, but they're also feeding on leeches. So hopefully this will start in just a second. Yeah. So mosquitoes are feeding from a wide range of animals. Here we go. Okay. Sorry. Okay, guys. So I'm out of time. I just get so excited about mosquitoes. Okay, so long story short, we were out looking for the host of this other mosquito. We found, this is down in Brazil, just to kind of, so mosquitoes are really good mothers. They risk their lives for their offspring. And these mosquitoes, this species in particular, Trichoprosopon, they guard their eggs. And they hold on to them. They hang out with this egg raft, kind of rocking back and forth, moving around, and just kind of making sure nothing happens to these. These eggs are in containers which are susceptible to flooding. So if too much water goes in, those eggs are gonna pop, fall out, and not survive. For some reason, they really want to stay to protect these eggs. Even when an entomologist comes along and tries to collect that mosquito, it doesn't fly away. It could just save itself if it just flew away. But instead, it chooses to just stay there with those eggs and get collected. Okay. Thank you, guys. Oh, yeah, so I don't know how much time we have for questions, but I'm really sorry. Feel free to reach out to me via email or social media. I'm relatively easy to find.
And we just want to thank Larry for giving us awesome talk for us today, and all of you for coming out, and Cypress and Growth for hosting us. Thank you.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
You're fine.